All right, next up is Michel Velis. Michel is a UX designer with over 12 years of experience working with numerous startups and Fortune 100 companies to create successful products for both consumer and enterprise markets. He has a unique hybrid background in UX, branding, and product design, which helps him create user focused, design led products. When he's not hashtag crushing it for the Bitovi UX team, he likes hiking, exploring, food, cars, and DIYs. I think maybe you should give Fabio some tips on the hobbies thing. All right, Michelle, get on up here. Floor is yours. Take it away.
Hello there, and thank you everybody here for joining here today. In today's episode, I will be talking about the structure and the benefits of a design system. And this will be divided in three parts, which I'm going to talk about in maybe the next episodes, like how to build a design system. And the last final part of that will be kind of like maintaining a design system. I think I always like this quote from Sun Tzu, which is the in the midst of chaos there's always an opportunity. And this always reminds me like when working on projects, like always like bringing like new team members or like working on a new feature. There's always like new features being bring to the project, new style guides, or like new buttons or new variations always being created, and this creates like a lot of like chaos or like this increases a lot of the inconsistencies throughout the project and a lot of redundancy and when a design system is not in place. And this is why it's always a great opportunity to learn from this and kind of like start revising and building your style guides, building design systems. And I think this is like a great starting point to define what's like a design system. I always define design system by a set of reusable components that are guided by like clear principles, best practices, and it can be all constructed together to build any number of applications. And like, and that being said, like all design systems do not share the same standards. It depends on the size of the project. It depends the size of the feature you're building, the size of the team, right? They can be like very extensive design systems or very basic design systems, but they always have like three most important kind of like categorizations, which is how modular is it, how versatile is it, and how well organized and like the organization around that. And what I mean by versatile, it means determining the level of strictness that is enforced within the design system. Because like a more like a strict like design system elaborates all the every bit detail possible into the documentation. And it also establishes like a very strict process when you come like introducing like new patterns or new components, which can help you in the long term of like scaling and maturing a product design system that prevent people from adding new variations we are going through a governance group or something like that. And what I mean like for being like modular, it's more like in sense like it's the approach that we use to produce a complete set of products by integrating or combining like smaller parts that are independent from each other. And like with this approach, think of like for example, building a car, right? When the car can be broken down or divided into smaller parts or simpler components, and they're independent like design to be like work together, manufacture together, and these individual components later on are assigned together to find and build like the final product, the final car. And that's what I think about the design system. All these smaller components that work independently, but when put together can also be work cohesively. And you can build like larger components, larger patterns. And then like what I mean by like, organization is, which I won't be going too in depth today on it, but it's like it's the practice of how the design system is governed, right? And there are like very three popular models out there, which is like the solitary model, the centralized model, and the federated model. All of them has a cons and a pro. A lot of companies that have worked in the past, they always try to merge the centralized and the federated model because it's the best that benefits the design system, also gives freedom for people to contribute and kind of like enhance and scale the design systems. where the solitary is more like a person or like one team that's responsible for managing or maintaining the design system or the rules. And like talking about this, like one of the other benefits about the versatile, about modular, the teams, and the design system, one of the benefits that this promotes, it promotes consistency. And what I mean by consistency, I mean like internal consistency, external consistency, and also like functional consistency. What I mean by internal is it allows the users to focus more on the actions and tasks in application instead of taking a time and effort trying to like learn the interface or how the action should be carried out, because that is already implemented. It's like a unit. It's like you don't have to worry about recreating things again. And what I mean by external is a user that has learned how to navigate, interact with your website, they will love as well to have the same feeling and the same experience throughout the whole ecosystem of applications. So if you have like a mobile application and the experience is different, that people wouldn't be happy, right? But if you have the same experience in your mobile applications or in desktop as well, this is what I call external consistency. And that's what design systems are great for. So external consistency can be achieved by keeping things familiar across different platforms or ecosystems and products. And then one of the great benefits about design systems that I have learned from the years is it decreases building time. Because like now we don't have to be focused about like building like new components or pattern because they already exist. And this is like true throughout like each stage, right? Like for example, like in the beginning of the slide when I was talking about like new people coming to the team, creating new components, creating new styles, that leads to developers recreating the same styles over and over again. And sometimes when that developer goes off the project and the developer comes, this disconnect, right? Nobody knows where to grab buttons, components, or patterns because there's nothing in place that ties all this together. And another great benefits is like this synchronizes teams, and like all team members are sharing the same language, same guidelines, the same resources. Decentralize the center and makes the team collaboration easier and helps members make better decisions by establishing like a more organized kind of like workflow, and also it increases the autonomy and speeding of both development and testing. And like one of the kind of like the favorites of like the CEOs or managers is this reduce the cost of development costs and also the cost of designs, because just like in financial debt, there's also like technical costs. And we're like the things like always like focusing on designing new things or like developing new things, you adding more cost to the project. But if it already exists, you don't have to worry so much about it because now we can focus on the experience and things like that. And the great things like the cost is like sometimes people go very crazy and design like a full extensive design system when it's not needed. Maybe we can just build the components or like patterns or the stuff that we need for the moment. We don't have to go so extensive for the things that we won't be using. So that's something also to think and have in mind as we build in the design system. And one of my favorites that this brings a room for innovation. Many people say that design system is very rigid or very strict. I don't agree with that. I think that's a myth. I think this brings room for innovation because now I don't have to be thinking how I'm going to be building a button because it already exists, it's already being established. But now I can focus more in the journey, on the experience of the user, or how to better the product. So this is like some of the benefits and values that it has. That being said, like all these things plays together with kind of like the building blocks, which helps provide those values and benefits. So like let's dive into each of them and discover what makes these structures of building blocks. So a design system is composed of several things, right? An identity, principles, patterns, components, and best practices. So on the next slide, we're gonna see what makes each of these areas. For example, in the identity area, there's different things are happening there. We have the colors, we have the fonts, we have images, and voice and tone, right? So, and what do you mean by colors, right? Like every brand has its colors, which help them distinguish the brand and help them create consistency experiences throughout products, right? And fonts, the typography creates the hierarchies, and short elements in the UI are clear and easily recognizable when scanning on the page. And like when I mean images, it's just not images. It can also be like illustrations, icons, photography, things like that, kind of like elements. And they're very important key element of the brand because they create like an emotional state when you like kind of like into the product, and when you get like familiar or like getting to know the brand or the product is like the most key element. And then there's like the voice and tone of the design system, right? Like it helps create tones when the user is going through the journey or is using the app. For example, like how we write error messages, how we write call to actions, or like how we write buttons and things like that. Like also like how we encourage people through getting a static guide. So these are things that make out the identity of this category. The next is like the principles, like how does the brand values apply to the design system? Why are you building this design system? What are you trying to solve? And like what is the objective of this of your brand, and how is that going to help the design system evolve and vice versa? And there's like patterns. So patterns is a group of components that designers use to solve usability issues. For example, it can be a combination of a navbar with a logo and menu links in a search box and a button. So that's what makes a patterns. So it's all combination of these components that you previously created, and now you start building them into a larger patterns that can be reused throughout applications, and that way everything's more consistent. So now I don't have to create a whole header that contains a logo, menu links, because it already exists. So that creates consistency throughout the ecosystem. And then there's like the components, which is like the reusable building blocks. Think of Legos. That's what I can think of, how you can use Legos to build larger objects or things or building blocks. So a sample of a reusable building block in a design system would be like an avatar or a badge or breadcrumbs or a day picker or an icon or a button, etc. So these are the reusable components that you can use to create patterns. And then like what makes the best practices is accessibility. How accessible and inclusive is your product? Is the design system meant for a specific target audience? Is it being inclusive for people that have difficulty seeing? The font sizes are readable. The colors are the contrast ratio. Is it the touch working properly? Is the spacing working properly? So all these things are in the accessibility. There's also like the UX part, where like there's like the best kind of like cases of the best positionings of the elements, the best placeholders, the best areas, the journeys, how everything connects and being used. And then there's like the guidelines of these components, which means, and this is something that not many people have in the design system, but it's also a great opportunity to create more cohesiveness, which is when you write how things needs to be used. For example, I've seen many times where people go when building a page and they have like many primary buttons and they start placing everywhere on the page. So a primary button in essence should only be used once because it's the primary function of a page, right? If there's other functions that needs to be performed, that's why we have the secondary button, or that's like what we have the tertiary button, where there's like more repetitive actions and like doesn't need to clutter the interface. That's why we use the tertiary buttons. So every button has a meaning and a purpose, and that's what the guidelines and the uses are there for. It also helps us dictate where these buttons need to be placed. For example, so we're in the guidelines, there can be like an area like hey, the primary buttons always going to be placed on the top right, right? So all designers and developer knows that primary buttons goes on the top right of the page to perform any given action. So that prevents from people to put it on the left or put it on the bottom, so everybody knows now where to put it. So like the dependency for designers to be in meetings, that gets reduced because now there's like clear guidelines and practices of how to implement these patterns and components. And then like the technical and the functional part, that's more like how the code is being used or the technology behind these components, because it's just not interface, it's not just the experience, it's also the technology that is being used to build these components. It can be Angular or React, and also the best practices that are behind this technology. And I think like for the next episode, which I wanted to take more time, is kind of like building the design system and what goes in more in depth in that, like from the metrics of getting to know all the inventories, the 6 nowadays, which means going throughout the whole application and defining what exists or the variations of that component and how that can be leveraged or merged into other instances of that component. So I'm going to be talking maybe down the next episode of how to build a design system. And then like the third last episode will be kind of like talking about more of how to govern and keeping the design system alive and keep evolving. So you guys, thank you so much for watching today. You guys have any questions?